What's up, lore masters? Today's video is going to be taking a look at Captain Georgiou and her decisions regarding the Prime Directive. I'll be discussing her breaking of the Prime Directive to save Saru and then not doing anything to save his people, who are enslaved and being eaten alive. It's Discovery, so needless to say, her interpretation of the Prime Directive, and even that of the Admiral's interpretation of the Prime Directive, makes no sense. Let's just get into it. As a brief summary of the episode that basically gives you all the spoilers, in the short trek, The Brightest Star, we learn that Saru's people, the Kelpians, are a pre-industrial age civilization that has built a theology around another alien society. These alien invaders, also known as the Baal, have sent down some form of probe or object that Kelpians utilize to send up their own people to the alien race in a ritualistic ceremony. It is insinuated that the Kelpians are being used for food in the short trek, though we are never explicitly told this in the episode itself. It is noted in the actual season of Discovery, don't worry, I do know that. The Kelpians apparently revere these aliens and the object, thinking them to be gods. The story is based around Saru, who believes that there has to be more than just what they see and wishes to not be transported up, but to go into the stars on his own to be like the gods. This is, of course, forbidden, and when a piece of the alien ship falls off during one of the ceremonies, Saru decides to keep it instead of destroying it like he's been told to. He somehow figures out how to re-engineer the device into a beacon. Saru contacts Starfleet and is saved by Captain Georgiou. When he asks if he can come back to save his people, Georgiou states that she already went through hell with the Admiralty to save him, and that they can never return due to the Prime Directive. First, if we assumed that this was a breach of the Prime Directive and they couldn't save Saru's people, that there were no exceptions, I'm on the fence if she should have done it. Don't get me wrong, I certainly see the merits and why she would want to fight the Admiralty to do it. Saru takes technology that they've never seen, centuries ahead of where the Kelpians are, and turns it into a beacon. This is literally like taking an FM radio, dropping it in the middle of an Indian settlement in the 1400s, and one of them turning it into a device that could send out a distress call. Something that even most of us today can't do. This makes Saru one of the greatest engineers in the galaxy. Seriously, I mean on par, if not better, than the likes of Scotty, Geordi, O'Brien, and others. So why he became a science officer is beyond me. It's extraordinary, and when you consider that the Kelpians are being subjugated in the way that they are, it makes sense that Georgiou would fight to have an exception on the Prime Directive. So when it comes to what she did here, assuming her interpretation is right, I don't necessarily blame her. However, if the Prime Directive is so staunch and they don't want to get involved, risking all of this for one person is not worth it. Saru is a genius, sure, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few and all that. If you're willing to save one, why not two geniuses? If two, why not four? If four, why not eight? And on and on. The risk of further contamination for not a lot of gain. Certainly you could argue that at least she's helping Saru out, she's doing this small bit. And that's why I'd be on the fence. Again, if the way she looks at the Prime Directive is right, she shouldn't be doing this. One person is simply not worth it. Oh, yeah, and I do want to point out, if she cared so much about the Prime Directive, why the hell did she land her ship right where she did? You know, right next to the village of the Kelpians where they can clearly see the lights. Oh, and she also goes to warp right on top of the village. Not even to speak about going to warp in an atmosphere, the people clearly see the ship go to warp. Really going out of your way to stop contamination there, Georgiou. But all of that aside, that's not even the biggest issue with this episode. The problem with this scenario is it shows a deep lack of knowledge from the writers when it comes to the Prime Directive, and it's a serious problem with prequels overall. There are at least two instances in the future where we see clear deviations from the Prime Directive. I mean, basically exceptions. In the original series episode, A Private Little War, Kirk decides to arm a people with more advanced weaponry after it's discovered that the Klingons have given an unreasonable edge to the other side. Remember, this is a pre-warp society. In that episode, Kirk does agonize over this decision, and it's something that Kirk and crew ultimately even regret. But they feel like they have to do it. So let's look at what's happening with Georgiou. We have a people being subjugated, and it's inferred eaten. And you're telling me Starfleet can't do anything? Sentient life is being subjugated and eaten, and they don't want to do anything. And this is somewhat of what pisses me off when it comes to Star Trek Discovery overall. You want to show diversity? That's great. That's fine. I'm not necessarily against that. But you show diverse people being idiots. You're telling me Georgiou isn't willing to stop a malevolent power from eating other sentient life, and yet you have Kirk and Picard, Sisko, all of them going out of their way to break the Prime Directive to save lives. I mean, seriously, are Star Trek Discovery writers like some form of alt-right doing the subtle writing to show idiots in command and make them women? Picard, Sisko, and Kirk would go out of their way to save the Kelpians, even if they lost their command. Hell, I bet Janeway would too. And you're telling me Georgiou is just okay, she sits back with it. BS. Anyway, getting off my high horse, additionally in the episode Pen Pals, we see the dogmatic Picard talking the Prime Directive as if it was a religion and stating that he will let an entire civilization die, until a little girl of that civilization asks for help. She asks for their help, and this overrides the Prime Directive. You know, like Saru basically was asking for help. And if you're about to get into semantics that he didn't directly ask, you can sod off. We both know that that's a reach and that he was technically asking for help. So in two instances, first, an alien civilization was already messing with the Kelpians. Two, they were asking for help. Both of these are exceptions we see in other series, and they don't do it here. And you know what my biggest problem with this? It's that a few lines and a minor change to a scene would have fixed this. It honestly may have just fixed the episode overall. Let's do this. Instead of making Georgiou look weak, let's try it again. I'll buy for a moment that Starfleet Command doesn't want to get involved. Admirals have generally been cowards or the foil of the heroes. So let's say that that's what happened. Now, something like this should have been said from Georgiou if that was the case. Georgiou would say something like, "Unfortunately, there are complicated rules and a Prime Directive that makes it hard for us to assist. Starfleet Command was very resistant to even saving you." Saru could then look downcast, like we see, like he knows that he's not going to see his family again, and then Georgiou would slightly smile. And she'd say something akin to, "But I've never been one to give up so easily. There is a certain latitude in the Prime Directive. Come with me, and together we'll one day find a way to free your people." Boom! We're off to the races and even have another arc. This even gives more justification for why Saru hated Michael so much after Michael got Georgiou killed. It adds more depth, it adds a ton to both characters, and now you have something for Saru to fight for in the future season. Again, I've said this before, the Bail are subjugating an entire planet and eating the people, and Starfleet is not doing one damn thing about it. And you could even make the argument that Starfleet doesn't want to be interventionist and that it's a slippery slope. When you start enforcing your will on others, where does it stop? But you're telling me Georgiou wouldn't try to work behind the scenes when every other hero in Star Trek ever has? This new writing makes the heroes look weak. And the fact that they are going for diversity is horrible optics when you have women not willing to save people like men. It doesn't jive with Star Trek, it doesn't go with the utopia, and it isn't anything like it was before. And if you would just admit that this wasn't the Star Trek of old and that it's a reboot, none of it would matter. In this scenario, Georgiou should have saved Saru, but she should have also started planning to save his people. She is a monster for not doing so. Only slightly better than the Klingons. But those are my opinions. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, guys, in the end, our lives are our story. Make yours better than Georgiou's.